part of what happens when you sleep is your brain literally sheds a lot of the negativity you've been picking up all day. And the treatment was literally 7 weeks of torture in which I was radiated in my mouth and throat.
What is up, everybody? And welcome back to the Schooling Struggle Podcast. It is our belief that the only guarantee in life is that we are all going to struggle. And how we choose to embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. What's up? What's up? My name is Pete, coming to you from Heartland, Vermont. And with me is my friend and co-host, Todd, coming to you from Tacoma, Washington. And we have an awesome special guest that I'm going to be introducing in a moment, coming to you from Sullivan, New Hampshire. But before I introduce the guest, I just want to say that there are a number of topics that I think are really relevant to our schooling struggle theme or the focus of our conversations. But some of the topics I just don't feel like I have enough professional knowledge or that I can speak in a way that I think would impact the listeners as well as someone who really knows their stuff with this. So with that said, I'm super excited to introduce Dr. William Bill Slammon. And the first thing I'll say is when I heard his name, I was so jealous of the last name, Slammon. I just think that would be the coolest last name to have. And I think one thing I'm learning as I go is that I'm not professionally trained in interviewing. And one of the hardest things for me is to introduce someone properly. And if they are too humble, then the listener doesn't know how amazing they are. So that's a little challenge for me. So I said to Bill, Dr. Bill, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do the introduction. He said, I'll introduce myself and I'll just keep it facts. So Dr. Bill Slammon, go ahead and drop us with a little intro about yourself with the facts.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on this on your podcast. I've been waiting anxiously for the invite, so I'm glad that we're here. Yeah, I'm Bill Slammon, and I have a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, but I've worked in schools for the last 22, 23 years, so that's been kind of my gig. As a psychologist, I've kind of done all kinds of things. I've worked almost exclusively with children and teenagers and families. And I've worked in medical settings, I've worked in mental health settings, and for the longest time now, I've been working in schools and working with both kids and staff in schools. What else about me? So I'm a dad. I've got 2 adult children. I have 1 stepchild who is currently a senior in high school, starting that fun all over again. I thought I was done with that process, the whole college thing. Speaking of my last name, Mr. Driscoll, I played high school sports and younger, right? So I played baseball and I played hockey, and being Bill Slammon, playing as a defenseman came in handy. And then I played football. If I got a lot of hits, then I lived up to my name.
Nice work.
But yeah, so I'm as I reached my older age, I'm still active athletically. I run, I mountain bike, I gravel bike, I do all those fun things.
Nice.
More of an endurance athlete now, not so much of a team competitive athlete at this point.
That's a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about. But before I get into that, I just want to check in with Todd and say, what's up, Todd?
What is happening, Peter? And Dr. Bill Slammon. Not much. Just another day in paradise in the 253.
Yeah. So Todd and I have had many conversations about different topics that we want to talk about on this podcast. And it's funny when we look at the analytics of the people that tune into this, it's this interesting gap of high schoolers, which makes sense given my position as a high school teacher, and then people who are middle-aged, like my age, that are in the midst of raising families. So when we think about cool topics that we can discuss on the podcast, it's like, how do we reach people basically from the age of 16 to beyond, but particularly 16 to 60. And when we talk about schooling struggle, one theme that comes up often in all of our lives, I think is really, really prevalent and relevant to all of us, is the topic of stress. So when I reached out to Dr. Bill, I said, hey, I'd love to bring you on the podcast. And he emailed back and said, what do you want to talk about? And there was 100 things that I wanted to list, but I only listed 6. And then when we had a pre-meeting the other day just to talk about today's show, we actually narrowed it down to we're just going to do 1 and do a kind of a deeper dive on it, because stress is something that many of us can relate to in our own way. And I'm really excited to hear what Bill has to has to share. So I'm going to set the stage right here. I just finished reading a really cool book called How Bad Do You Want It? And it's about the psychology of endurance sports with humans. I'm just going to read this to set the conversation. Before he died in 1996, at 100 years of age, comedian George Burns said, "If you ask me what is the most important key to longevity, I would have to say it is avoiding worry, stress, and tension. And if you didn't ask me, I would still have to say that." So as I'm learning about longevity and vitality and kicking butt into our 80s and 90s, I'm trying to figure out what is the best way to set myself up for that now.
As hard and as challenging as dealing with stress is and can be, I actually love this topic. Like this, I thought about it after we talked the other day, Pete, and this has really been this topic has been the focus of my professional career in one fashion or another. I've had an interest in the impact of stress for my life, really, but definitely my professional life.
So before we go any further, I think it would behoove us to if you could just, from a clinical standpoint, just define what stress, because we all have different kind of perspectives on what stress is on the mind and on the body. If I were to ask you, hey, doc, I think I might be dealing with stress. What is stress? Where would you start with that?
Right. It's a super good question. And it's actually a fairly hard question to answer because there are all kinds of stress. And the reality is, excuse me, the reality is that there's a level of stress that is necessary. Being a student of anything involves a level of stress. You have to experience a degree of stress and frustration in order to grow and to learn and to push yourself farther from where you started. There is a level of stress that we experience in almost every part of our lives. To answer your question, stress is when there are certain forces sort of impinging on us, whether they're like external demands or pressures or expectations that others have or that we have of ourselves, that in the moment exceed our sense of our capacity to manage. And this is, I think, a critical piece, at least from my perspective, because what allows us to successfully manage and deal with stress is the belief that we're able to deal with it, to manage it, to do something about it. And when we're in a situation, no matter how stressful it is, if we know we can end the stress, if we know we can take steps to get to the other side of it or get through it, then we're going to be fine. We're going to be okay. If we look at the literature on trauma, right, and I was thinking about this. I'm happy to talk all about trauma, but I also was thinking I don't necessarily want to get off into that area because that's like days and days of conversation. But what makes something traumatic, what makes that kind of stress traumatic, among other variables, is that it is inescapable. The stress that is overwhelming and that causes harm to us is the stress that we can't get out from under. So stress is kind of a pressure, it's a demand, and in the moment it may feel a little bit like it's going to exceed our resources to cope with it. Most of the stress we experience throughout the day is stress that we know is transient, like that's going to come and go, or that we can manage it. We've been here before, know what to do about it, or we have a way of working through it. It becomes really problematic when it feels like there is nothing we can do about it. It feels like we're not able to manage or get through it. Let me draw a distinction between kind of what technically is called acute stress and what we refer to as chronic stress.
Yeah, cool. If you could tie the kind of the science into that as well, like what's actually physiologically happening in the body with cortisol elevated and that stuff too, that would be awesome.
Sure. So let me, that's great. That's helpful. So when we experience a stressful event, whether it's sort of high on the, like very stressful or even medium stressful, in addition to what we experience psychologically, what we're aware of, what we think of, what we feel, and in fact, a lot of what we feel is coming from our body. So our body has a physiological reaction to stressful life events. Let's say, let me give a more concrete example. Let's say you're out for a jog, and even if you're not afraid of dogs, suddenly a neighbor's dog comes charging at you and teeth are bared and the dog's barking and growling and you feel under threat. It's a worrisome situation. In that moment, your adrenal glands in particular, triggered by your thalamus, which is this little part of your brain, kind of at the top of your spinal cord, triggers the release of a whole bunch of hormones, one of which is cortisol. The other is adrenaline, and there's a variety of others, and all of them prime your body for action. It's a classic, you are then primed for fight or flight. You are better able to run away, or you're better able to go into battle and take care of business and survive. The goal is ultimately is survival in that moment. Your body's also designed, after it releases all these chemicals, to quickly recover, for those chemicals to start washing themselves out of your system. And part of the what we label as anxiety and distress and some of these other emotions it's our brain labeling the physiological experience we're having when we're under stress. And just let me mention, there are significant health outcomes related to either frequent repeated moments of severe stress, or not the opposite, but the other end of the continuum, chronic stress, where you're living in a chronically stressful situation, where those hormones are being released constantly. And what we know from science is that that's basically, to be simple, super bad for your body and mind.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is it's healthy to experience stress. And I know from a physiological standpoint, and all the research I've done about physical exercise, an intense workout or an intense exercise endeavor is inducing stress on the body. And that stress on the body is what garners the adaptation for your body to say, holy crap, you're asking me to do this? Okay, next time you ask me to do this, I'm going to be more prepared. And it takes that stress and it converts it into a higher level of fitness in microdoses. But what I've heard in the past, and what I think I'm hearing you say now, is stress in many ways is actually a very positive thing. I heard that once that everything in our DNA traces back to two things: survival and procreation, right? So when there was a bunch of cavemen and women sitting around the fire and you heard a twig break in the woods behind you, your cortisol levels will elevate because that could be a saber-toothed tiger. And the fact that you're aware that the saber-toothed tiger is there could save your life because you can get inside the cave. It's more important to be aware of the saber-toothed tiger than it is to recognize how sweet the roses smell, because that's not as pertinent for survival. So there's a piece of stress that is actually a very healthy part of our being, but the constant cortisol level being elevated in our body of what is chronic stress is what's debilitating to our mind and to our body and the longevity of our health.
Yes. And the example you just gave reminded me of something, and that is, it is important for young children to experience levels of stress and frustration, and to learn both neurologically to develop the hardware, the wiring, to be able to tolerate certain amounts of stress and frustration. Because we see kids in our day-to-day work in schools that never develop this skill. And that's really what it is. It's a skill to develop a level of frustration and stress tolerance. And these are the kids that are so easily overwhelmed by the smallest thing. We often refer to this as resilience, and I would say that it's a little bit of a cliched concept now, but I think it still has relevance. Is that most of us have a capacity to manage a degree of stress, and most of us have a sense of when we're starting to reach our threshold and like we're starting to get overwhelmed. But that threshold has been developed and built over the years, right? For those of us fortunate enough to not live under chronic stress, or to at least have had the opportunity to experience frustration as children, and develop the internal machinery to be able to tolerate and manage that. So yes, there's those healthy amounts of stress, whether it's that intentional, like I'm working out, I'm trying to make myself stronger, and the way I do that is by stressing my system, and the right amount of stress leads to growth and health. It's when you get in, and this is my orientation as a clinical psychologist. What I'm kind of dealing with and responding to day in and day out is for those people who are dealing with excess levels of stress and demand and pressure, where it is just overwhelming their system. They're flooded with these hormones. They're flooded psychologically with all the things they're trying to manage. And the way I think about it sometimes is that in those moments at that level, they don't have the internal resources to cope and manage. And so then we often end up then resorting to bad habits. We resort to drinking alcohol, to doing drugs, to doing things that help us feel better in the moment, that take away some of the stress and anxiety in the moment, but they're ultimately damaging both to our mind, but also to our bodies.
What do you have, Todd?
Oh man, I have so much.
I love that.
Uh,
That's one of my favorite things about this podcast. When Todd says, "Oh man, I have so much," I love it.
I've been seeing him nod as we've been going along, so I've been waiting.
It's interesting because I've done obviously not as deep as research as you, but when you start talking about trauma, like the body keeps score. Like I've been reading all these books recently about these kind of things, and then overlay that with stress in my own life that I've been watching accrue at a constant rate in the last month or 2 months. And it's very interesting to me to think about this notion of, and I'm interested to see your perspective of this. Is I wrote down, you mentioned coping, like how do you manage, or you said cope, but I wrote down how do you manage or learn the skills by which we do that, to cope with that. And then that last point that you made about kids being what's the word, introduced to stress at higher levels in order to kind of like an immune response, right? Like, oh, I need to know how this works, so later I'm not totally just aloof and I don't know what's going on and the stress is going to overwhelm me. Right. But I wonder, as Peter and I talk about things in physical realms, and we share a lot of space in there, and now with this podcast we share space in the more intellectual realm. But I wonder, in your in your travels, or in your practice, or however you look at it, can the beneficial type of stress be used to offset the flooded condition of people? So let's say somebody's constantly triggered all the time, and you try to help them, but they can't see the forest through the trees, right? Can you use the beneficial type of stress in small increments, like maybe you should go run, or maybe you should work out, or maybe these things, in order to offset and then begin to unwind that triggered state?
I would say, absolutely. I mean, if we look at the lists of recommendations for any of us who are managing higher levels of stress, and especially for people with histories of either extreme stress or trauma and different things like this, the recommendations are often not. They don't all fall into the category of mild, like you said, Pete, micro doses of stress. But some of them do. So like going for walks or running or engaging in yoga, which obviously can become fairly intense. There's evidence that those kind of physical activities can help to settle and calm the body. You referred to the book, The Body Keeps the Score. If you read that book or listen to any of Bessel van der Kolk's teachings, he will say that with trauma, he believes first and foremost that all therapy should be physical and somatic. That he would rather
Hell
see.
Yeah, that's
That's
the
right.
tree that I'm
That's
barking up. Let's go.
Mr. Driscoll's trauma treatment program. That's what I think of it as.
I don't need a whole bunch of studies to tell me that exercise makes me feel better.
Well, and it's not just you, right? It's all the kids you work with, and a lot of them come to us with a lot of difficult background. But what Bessel van der Kolk says is that for those that have had extreme kinds of stress that we would label as traumatic or trauma, they are not even able to connect to language to process what they've experienced. So coming into talk psychotherapy isn't helpful initially. It becomes helpful if they're able to do the more somatic and physiological work. And like he will say, he'd rather see somebody take tango lessons or do an improv acting class or play drums than go into talk therapy at the beginning of their treatment.
To give a language to the outlet, right?
And also to process, like as the book title suggests, what we know about intense stress and trauma is that our body holds on to it. Our body absorbs it and remembers it literally. And we meet people who don't have conscious memories of some of the things they've experienced, but they can have events happen in their lives that trigger them, and it's a totally physiological response. Like they may shut down, they may become super agitated, but it's these triggers, and they don't. There's not the language connection yet. So until you help to settle and integrate the body and help the body to realize it can be safe and be okay, it's only then that people can start to access their language centers and start to put language to what they've experienced. and to start to develop other ways of coping and dealing at a more verbal level.
It sounds a lot like the permission to feel episode we had back when we got this thing going. Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, no, I totally. I could talk. I could talk to Dr. Bill all day about this. It's very interesting. So when we think about tactical steps, and I don't know if we're there yet, Peter, you can stop me, but I struggle a lot to learn and even a lot of times recall what has worked in the past. And I don't know if that's just because of my ADHD, like, well, who knows what kind of cocktail things are going on in my head. But but I wonder, are there steps to, and it might be the early, I don't know, are there easy step, not easy. What are some steps that work well for that coping mechanism? Like, probably the earlier you start with people, the better off they are to cope long term or through the duration of their life, depending on what comes up. But for my own selfish reasons, I'm wondering to myself, well, if this worked before and I forgot about it, how do I make sure that I reinforce that so next time I remember that I can use that to get out of that stressful situation?
That's a good question. So I have several thoughts pop into mind. I mean, the one immediate thought is, if we have a way of kind of keeping a journal or a list or whatever works for you to help keep a list of like, oh, that was helpful, I have to remember to do that again, like whatever kind of information tracking system works. The other thing I wanted to say, and I hope I'm answering your question, so there isn't a one size fits all when it comes to what helps people deal with their day-to-day stress and what helps people who have had significant stress in their lives, whether it's chronic stress or some significant traumatic event, like a bad car accident or something like that. There are a few variables, though, that at least my side of the, as a professional in this work, think about, right? So I'm interested to know, when was the trauma happening? Like, at what age for the person? And since I work mostly with children, we see very big differences between kids who experience trauma at a pre-verbal level from children who experienced it when they were like early grade school, or children who experienced it when they were like middle high school age.
Interesting.
And part of it is because of the level of their language development, right? If you experience some kind of physical or sexual trauma before you even have language, then you literally have no language to attach to that experience. But you've had the experience. It was real and it was traumatic. And so if you look at the literature, there are lots of different approaches to addressing trauma based on the time in your life when it occurred. So that's part of it. And then another variable that I bring into play frequently is temperament, right? So even though we are all individuals and we all, in my mind, I like to think we can become whoever we want to become, there's some pretty solid evidence to suggest we all come into the world with a particular temperament. And in the kind of grossest, most general way, temperament can be divided into two, which, like I said, total simplification, because obviously there's like hundreds of gradations of temperament. But the one temperament is the kind of kids that come into the world who are confident, curious, they're interested in exploring, they don't startle easily, they're gregarious. You could loosely refer to them as extroverted kinds of kids. And then there are kids who come into the world who are more on the kind of shy, anxious end of things. And these are kids who tend to be more introverted, they're more cautious, they're more reactive to the world. And whether or not these two groups have experienced trauma, I mean, actually it makes a difference, because the more introverted group may have a harder time with really stressful events than the more extroverted group. But having a sense, when somebody comes to me and they need help with dealing with past stress or trauma or just current stress, I always want to have an understanding of like, what's their temperament like? What is it? Like, what's their kind of almost like hardwired threshold for stress? And then from that, to get to answering your question, crafting an approach that is sort of literally tailored to their temperament, to their experience, to what they've been struggling with. Because like I said, it's not one size fits all. So for some, intense physical exercise is the way to go. It is like magic for them. And for others, sitting quietly and meditating is the way to go. And of course, it isn't either or, right? Some people will do all and all the above. They'll get into it.
Interesting.
I feel like I'm a prime example of someone who my coping mechanism has always been intense exercise. Like before I was able to put words to it, which I did much later in life, I just had this intense anger and temper when I was a kid, and I couldn't put words to it. I didn't know, but like I would just go outside and shoot hoops or go outside and run up hills and stuff. And now as I'm getting older, I live by the adage, there is no problem a good workout cannot cure. And it's one of these things like, well, if it works for me, it obviously has to work for everybody. And I live this life where I get to share this thing that has positively shaped my life with people every single day. And it's a really, really special thing for me. But I'm aware that it's not the answer for everyone, but it has been the answer for me. So I'm really excited to share it.
Is that hard for you to let go of? If you're in the teaching role and you're like, man, this worked for me. I got a class around this. This is going to work for you too. Do you find early on that it was like, take the pill, this will work? Or like, how does that manifest for you? Is there like, you clearly know if this person is not going to work for, or is it something you can work on?
No, I truly believe that it can help everybody. Like it might not help everyone as profoundly as it helped me, but I think that from the research I've done, from what I've seen anecdotally for doing it for 17 years now with kids, I think that it truly can help everyone. My dad, who's dealing with a sedentary lifestyle and decades of decrepitude now is creeping up on him. Like I still feel exercise is the answer for him. And so I do feel like it's in some modicum a presentation that physical exercise is one of the answers. I'm not saying it's the answer. And one question I had for you, Dr. Bill, was I hear a lot of the stuff that I read is obviously biased because the platform is fitness enthusiasts, but how exercise compares to medication when it comes to dealing with stress. And I've heard all sorts of different stats like, this medicine is just as good as an hour of workout a day, blah, blah, blah. But people would prefer just to pop the pill than to put in the work to do the exercise when really it can have the same result if you're willing to put in the time and the effort. I'm just curious to know if there's any literature on that, where that stands and what your perspective is on that type of stuff.
That's a great question. And to be honest, I'm not up on the literature. What I will tell you is there is a literature. There's a whole science. There's lots of science out there looking at the benefits of exercise, of various types of exercise, comparing weightlifting to aerobic exercise and looking to see which has a better bang for the buck, if you will. And this kind of research usually looks at mental health issues across the spectrum. So not just stress specifically, but might look at actually even major mental illness like bipolar disorder, major depression, things like that. My understanding of the literature is that yes, like uniformly, exercise of whatever form fits best for the person, like whatever one they'll do ultimately is the one that's going to help them.
We call it enjoyable and sustainable.
Exactly. And I would say, Todd, to go back to your comment about, kind of trying to force people, I think that there's a degree to which you could safely say that physical exercise has the potential to be universally beneficial to everyone. And part of that is because, like, I think about one of the most influential books in my, at least my athletic career and probably in my longevity, was Born to Run. I was running at the time, but when it came out, it changed my life. It changed the way I ran mechanically, and it then opened up running for me as something I could actually do and not be in pain all the time. And part of the take home for me with that book was the idea that like we were born to move. We are physically designed to be moving and engaging physically in our world. I know every summer when I am home more than I'm at work, my workouts are, cutting down trees and mowing lawns and picking up heavy things and carrying them. I think about Pete every summer because I'm like walking around my yard, carrying heavy things. And I'm like, Pete would think this is a really great thing to do. Because I'm not just picking up heavy things, but I'm walking with them and moving with them. So I go back to school every year and I'm like probably as fit as I ever am, even if I don't get on my bike or run much.
What I think is really crazy. I'm interrupt you. I apologize.
That's okay.
But
no, please.
What's really fascinating is I truly believe that we were meant to move as well, and now our technology and our progression has led us to a point where sedentary lifestyles is a major issue, right? Like we don't have to move to survive anymore. That the need to move to provide for ourselves is no longer there.
Right.
So now it's the flip. Now it's to survive. We have to carve out an hour of our day. And I always say, I walk into a gym, there's a bunch of weights stacked in a pile. I move them around for an hour, and when I leave, the weights are in the same places when I arrived. Like, how counterproductive is that? So I have this career where I'm teaching people in the gym proper movement patterns, but really I believe that the best, healthiest way to live is to move outside of the gym and not have to set a time aside for exercise, but the exercise is just inherent within your day.
Right. Right. And it's hard, even working in schools, we have more opportunity to move and walk around and engage with people in different ways in different places, but it's still not at the intensity of our forebears, when they were farming and doing all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think to go to kind of leap off of your point, not only are we more sedentary, but we still have a brain that is wired for threat detection. So we have a supercharged brain that is always, and I could slip into some theory real quick, which I think might be helpful. But our brains are wired for threat detection, and yet the threats themselves, by and large, are really not even there. But the alarm still goes off, right? And sometimes the alarm goes off because we see somebody we're anxious to talk about or talk with. I mean, or we have a deadline and we start getting really tense because we're supposed to have this thing done by tomorrow at 4 or whatever. The little bit of theory I want to drop is this. Our brains are, and this factors into stress and trauma and all these things. Our brains are prediction machines. We spend the great majority of our mental time and energy predicting what is about to happen in the next millisecond.
Recognizing patterns.
Well, patterns help us to stay chill. Sometimes patterns, alert us that something's amiss, because it could be a pattern that a pattern can also be a trigger, because sometimes it's a pattern that led to bad things in the past. Even though it's unlikely to lead to bad things now, it still raises our heart rate. It still releases cortisol and adrenaline, and we still have that reaction. But our brains are constantly trying to predict what's about to happen next, and it's constantly matching this influx of sensory information with what we're thinking, and our brain itself consciously, cognitively is trying to predict, like, what's going to happen next.
Do you think that in those cases where obviously everybody brings their own, you bring your own baggage, right? Everybody brings this to the bus stop. But do you think that in those cases where the anticipated or the predicted behavior that anybody, let's just say children in this case, that children see in adults is, do you think that those moments where you're like, man, that was the best teacher. Oh, I had the greatest interaction with this one person, and now we're going to be friends forever. Do you think that those are the aha moments where that individual, let's say the children in this case, the child had a moment of recollection or recognition that, wait, this may be against the prediction that I think, or the background that I hold, and now I'm willing to forge ahead, maybe with this one person, maybe with this group of people, in a way that then takes me to a positive light or takes me to a more positive interaction. Do you think that's a reality?
I think it's a reality, and I think, I talk to teachers about this. Part of the potential that teachers and other people that work with children and adolescents have is to help them rewrite their scripts. Right? We all have these scripts. We all have these narratives and stories we've been telling ourselves our whole lives, and they've been told to us, like, in one fashion or another. We didn't just make them up. They come by them honestly. And for a kid to have that one, even if it's a singular experience of, like, I did and said that, and Mr. Driscoll just stood there, and he was like, I could tell he still loved me, and it was fine. That moment is life-changing, because in that moment the adult rewrites the script for the kid. Now, there's a lot of competition that's going to try to draw that kid back to the old script, but the hope is that if it happens enough, we can keep showing them that we're going to be there, that we're going to show up, that we can metabolize their big feelings, that we're not afraid of them, and not of them as a people, but their feelings. We're not afraid of all the negative emotion they have, and that we think they're a good person. It's like that kind of stuff. That's like big day in, day out, long term, how we help people cope
Yeah.
and manage and build internal resources, because then kids start to feel like, hey, I'm using Pete just because I see him around school and I see what he does. The kids start thinking, hey, if someone cool like Mr. Driscoll can like me and think I'm a good person, maybe I'm a good person. Like maybe that's real. And just that thought can
Yeah. I think
literally
that's the easiest part to,
rewire the brain.
yeah, I think that's the easiest part to lose.
I think it's safe to say that we all know people in our lives that are dealing with chronic stress or are in stressful situations. And the question for me is often, how can I help? Students will come to me often and say, oh, Mr. D, I'm so stressed. What should I do? What can I do? So if someone like me or Todd, that's not a clinical psychologist, were to be hanging out with someone and they said, Pete and Todd, I just feel really, really stressed right now. I feel overwhelmed. Like I'm always stressed and I can't get out from under it. What's a tactical piece or a couple tactical pieces that we could tell them, Dr. Bell, or where would we start with them?
That's a great question. So what occurs to me immediately is, or what I'd be inclined to do, is I'd want to hear some about their stress. Like I don't want to hear some about well, what's going on? Tell me about what's going on. First and foremost, maybe the most important thing you can do is to simply validate that you hear them. I hear you. You're stressed, and I get it. Maybe they shared with you already what they're going through, and to be able to just say, yeah, that's a lot. Just that simple act of validating their subjective experience is incredibly powerful. And it's relationship building, right? Because when I was thinking about, if you asked me, so how do we help people? Um, I think one of the most powerful sort of stress inoculating activities is to have some close social relationships with people. It's
Can you
kind
define for me stress inoculating?
of, and that I hope maybe I don't know if that's the best phrase or term, but if we think of some kinds of stress, and often it's not the kind of stress, it's the amount of stress. So it's like the dose more than the type. When I have close friends that I can reach out to, or when I'm spending time with them, there's a sense of you're sharing. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. Even if all they're doing is man, that sucks. Just that is sometimes oh, it's not just me. This is heavy stuff. And so getting that validation that yeah, this is heavy stuff. I'm feeling this way for a reason. It's not because there's something wrong with me. It's not because I'm a crappy person. It's because the stuff that's going on in my life is heavy stuff. That has a lot of power. And our relationships, I think, help us to carry some of that. Not only can they be validating, but then they also kind of share the load sometimes when you have really close, whether it's a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend or a brother or sister or parents or whoever. When we have good, healthy relationships, those people are kind of, even if it's more in our mind, they're there to help us carry the load, and it just makes it manageable and tolerable for as long as necessary. So that's number one, what's the nature of the stress? What's going on? Validate. And then kind of, I think you alluded to this, Pete, the idea of what do we have control over and what do we not have control over? And sometimes it's what do we not have control over yet, right? Because I've had plenty of things in my life where it's this thing is stressing me out and there's nothing I can do about it. But I know that in a number of weeks or months, I may be in a better position to do something about it. And the hard part then is waiting until I can do something about it. But to help people to, almost make a list of, well, what parts of these can you do something about? Another really important ingredient, I think, is asking to be invited. A person comes to you and they say, hey, I'm really stressed out. They're kind of inviting you to hear their story, right? I like to ask for permission or an invitation to say, hey, do you want to talk about some ideas about what I think you might do that might help? Rather than assume that oh, I'm just going to start laying this stuff on you. Because again, you want to empower people. You want to let them know you respect them and you believe they have ideas and they can probably figure it out. If you want to hear my thoughts, I'm happy to share them with you. Do you want me to talk? Do you want to talk about that and to kind of get invited in? I think it's also an important ingredient.
It's huge. You got anything, Todd?
Thank you for the work you do. It's
Oh,
important.
thank you.
So I think as we wrap up, I'd like to kind of flip that and say, okay, I'm feeling stressed out. what do I do? And it sounds to me like what you're saying is double down on the positive relationships in your life. Spend time, attention, and energy with those who are fountains, who fill you up, versus the drains that, take away from the positivity in your life. What are some other tactics that I can use if I'm feeling like I'm in a state of chronic stress, or that I'm getting to a stage where it's having negative health ramifications?
There's many, right? The list is long. There's two core things, I think. There's one that I think is most important, but it's sort of in the realm of taking good physical care of yourself, right? But the thing that's at the top of that list for me is sleep. And it's the thing that's at the bottom of the list for a lot of teenagers, because for a lot of reasons, biologically and schedules and screens and all that kind of stuff. I've been doing a lot of reading about the impact of sleep, and the impact of sleep, not on just stress management, but also on longevity. And what we're discovering, and Pete, you guys, and Todd, you already probably know this, like sleep may be the most important health-related activity we engage in, period, right?
I'm shaking my head with huge
Yeah,
agreement
yeah.
nods.
So,
Huge.
and
Yeah.
we've heard this forever, sleep is important, you need to, but it's like, not only is it important for your physical body health, part of what happens when you sleep is your brain literally sheds a lot of the negativity you've been picking up all day. It cleans house. That's what sleep does for your brain. During your sleep patterns, your sleep cycles, your brain is cleaning out all the debris, all the yuckiness, and is helping you really start fresh every morning. And it also helps you to consolidate what you learned during the day, like in school or whatever.
When you sleep well, because
When
you
you
could be
sleep
asleep.
well,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, which, and like lately after reading all this stuff, I'm like, no, I must sleep well.
Yeah,
When I don't,
I
I
put
start
pressure on
freaking out.
myself to
Oh
sleep
my
well, which
God.
has a negative. Yeah.
I'm so stressed out. Why? Because I
Yeah.
can't sleep well. The other thing, and Pete, you and I have talked about this a lot in the past, I think maybe one of the single most important things that has gotten me through difficult times is mindset, and specifically how you choose to think about what you're going through. We may not have control over a lot, but we literally can always control how we view what's going on. I am weeks away from wrapping up uh, my 6th decade on this planet, and I still have to remind myself when things start to kind of run on fumes, or when things start getting me down. It's like I have a choice here about how I view what's going on. I can let it defeat me. I can let it weigh me down. And not that it isn't heavy, but I can let it do that. Or I can think, nope, you've got the juice, you've got the resources, you can manage this, you can get through this. This is good, things are going to come from this. Yeah, it's hard now. There's a saying that like pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. It's like I embrace that. I mean, I've had plenty of suffering in my life, and it has been suffering, but I've learned the power of how I think about it completely changes the experience. And
Where did you learn that? Like, was it? We talk about this all the time. Was it a
Yeah.
switch? Was it like, oh, my 40s, I knew it was coming. Oh, maybe my 50s, I strengthened it a bit by X, but now it's like everything.
To be honest, and if you don't mind me sharing, so I think I'm, in books and hearing people talk, and throughout forever, since college for sure, maybe high school, mentors and books I've read and all this stuff. Like the messages seemed like it was always the same.
Mm-hmm.
A little over 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with tonsil cancer, which could be really bad. Could have, like most cancers, could have a very unwanted outcome. The good news was 96% curable. And oncologists don't use the word curable, especially not out of the gate. So I was like, awesome. They're like, but. I was like, okay, what's the but? You have to get through the treatment. And the treatment was literally 7 weeks of torture in which I was radiated in my mouth and throat and given chemotherapy once a week. It was in that moment when I was told what I was going to go through for the next 35 days, or actually 35 days rounds of radiation for the next 7 weeks, and the suffering would last beyond that. I realized I had to make up my mind. Like, what was my mindset going to be going into this? I could go in there and feel sorry for myself. I could be afraid that I was going to get sick and die. I could be afraid of the pain that I was going to experience. Or I could think of this as a training opportunity, like a mind training opportunity, an opportunity to allow this to happen and not allow it to basically run the show, to be in charge, you know? And it was intense, and it got intense, and there was a lot of pain. So when my cancer treatment started, I felt like I was on a ship and I was just offshore, and I was kind of watching everybody else in my life, you know, from a couple hundred yards out at sea. There was this weird kind of distancing that happened because of the medicines and whatnot. Um, but then I had my islands of, I don't think I called them islands of sanity. They were like islands of pleasure or something like that, where I have these moments where I just felt good. It could have been steroids. I don't know what it was. But in between the really difficult parts, I had these times, and I was just like, all right, I'm on the beach. I'm just chilling. But I chose to make it the most positive experience it could be. And the interesting thing was I got so much feedback from nurses and doctors. They were like, we've never seen anybody go through this like you're going through it. How are you doing it? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just doing it. Like just showing up and doing it. So it made a difference, right? But it was about how I chose to see it instead of thinking like, oh, you know, this is going to hurt.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Ramble.
I lead off the show by saying how we embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. And that is a great example of that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So good.
And I've heard, when I've listened to you guys in your podcast, I've heard you say like, oh, we could just keep talking. And I feel the same way. I feel like we've scratched the surface.
For days.
Yeah.
For days. Well, we'd love to have you back on to tackle another topic that is forthright and very, very prevalent amongst all humans. And I'm excited to see what that will be, what that conversation will be. But we truly thank you for your time, Dr. Bill. For all you listeners out there, we appreciate your ears. We thank you for your time. And we are incredibly grateful for your attention. We're the School and Struggle Podcast. We are out.
See ya.